There was a certain rich man who clothed himself in purple and fine linen, and who feasted luxuriously every day. At his gate lay a certain poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores. Lazarus longed to eat the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. Instead, dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried by angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. While being tormented in the place of the dead, he looked up and saw Abraham at a distance with Lazarus at his side. He shouted, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm suffering in this flame." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, whereas Lazarus received terrible things. Now Lazarus is being comforted, and you are in great pain. Moreover, a great crevasse has been fixed between us and you. Those who wish to cross over from here to you cannot, neither can anyone cross from there to us." The rich man said, "Then I beg your father, send Lazarus to my father's house. I have 5 brothers. He needs to warn them so that they don't come to this place of agony." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They must listen to them." The rich man said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will change their hearts and lives." Abraham said, "If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, then neither will they be persuaded if someone rises from the dead." So ends the reading of God's holy word.
Thank you, Bonnie. Do you remember, those of you that are old enough, back in the, I think it was the mid-'70s, there was a TV quiz show called Name That Tune. Sound familiar? Remember that show? If you recall, it was a quiz show about contestants would actually bid and say that they could name that tune in so many notes. And then it'd start off maybe with 10 notes, and then the next contestant would bid 9 and 8, 7, 6, 5, and got even lower and lower, which I couldn't understand at all how they could do that. But oftentimes it got down as low as 2 notes. A contestant would say, "I can name that tune in 2 notes." And sure enough, they'd play 2 notes on the piano, and the contestant would either get it right, or if the person got it wrong, it would go to the next contestant to see if they could find out what tune that was. A very difficult show. But today we're going to play something different. Today we're going to play, are you ready for this? Name That Philanthropist. So what I need you to do is I'm going to go through a series of clues as to who this person is. We'll give you the first clue. It's a male. It's a guy. And as I go through these clues, if you get an idea of who it might be, just raise your hand or just go ahead and shout out the name, whoever you think this philanthropist might be. Okay? There's a prize for the winner. Yeah, oh boy. They can give me a back massage, is what they The first set of clues. He was an outstanding church and concert organist. He even designed some of the world's greatest organs. In addition, he was an authority on the composer Johann Sebastian Bach and wrote several books about him. And last but not least, he was also a theologian. Today we're going to continue our series on the principles of the parables. And today's parable that Bonnie read to us was called, and has many titles, but this one's called Lazarus and the Rich Man. Or in some cases, the rich man and Lazarus. It just depends on which translation of the Bible that you have. But it's a parable that Jesus is telling to some Pharisees in an effort to get them to understand something complicated, which he was very good at doing in telling his parables. There's only one thing that is more costly than caring, and that is not caring. Without question, love for others is indeed demanding, but the alternatives are deadly. I'm sure that nothing pleases God more than when we are pleasing somebody else, when we show love, compassion, and help to someone else. And I'm also sure that when we show selfishness and no concern for somebody else, that breaks God's heart. As you recall, that's one of the two major commandments that God has given us, is to love our neighbor as we do ourselves. Sometimes, in the case of the rich man in this parable, we love money more than we love others. Next set of clues for our Name That Philanthropist. One of his first books was entitled The Quest for the Historical Jesus. He was a teacher at the University of Strasbourg in Germany. He taught university courses in religion, philosophy, and also Greek and Hebrew. He was a man well educated beyond his intellect. There's proof throughout the Bible that God wants us to care for other people, that God wants us to love others. One of those pieces of proof is another parable called the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's called the parable of the Good Samaritan because the Samaritan was good. He did good things to the poor man on the side of the road. He cared enough to stop. He cared enough to help. And because he cared enough to do something good for someone in need, he was called the Good Samaritan. Another parable that explains this is the parable of the prodigal son, where the older brother does not attend the party given for his younger brother who had returned from being out amongst the world, so to speak. And he didn't attend this because he was jealous of the attention that his younger brother was getting. So it's a parable about how petty he was by not going to it. Now we see in this documentation again that Bonnie read to us today, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, the poor beggar. Does anybody know what Lazarus means in Hebrew? Anybody know what that is? Lazarus means the one who God helps. So if you recall the other story of Lazarus, Jesus' good friend, God brought him back to life. Now there's significance in that story when you hear about the ending of this particular parable. It's important to note that this parable is not a parable about the geographic description and location of heaven and hell, although it does describe that, but that's not the meaning of this particular parable. It's a drama. It's a play with two scenes. Scene one opens up in an elegant dining room where the rich man is feasting and indulging himself and throwing scraps to the street dogs. Now, they didn't have napkins back in those days. What they had was bread, and what they used the bread for was to wipe their lips and their hands, and then they'd throw the bread into the street. And all Lazarus was hoping to get was some of this bread. But the dogs were there too quick to get the bread from him. So he did not get it. Here's some more clues. Our philanthropist had all his previous achievements that we talked about earlier and honors, still believed at the age of 30 that his life was incomplete. So at the age of 30, in 1904, he read a magazine article on the condition of the people living in the Congo, a very impoverished nation in Africa. After reading this article, he would go to Africa and try to help the unfortunate people. However, first, he thought he could do a better job, even after all this stuff that he's done, he thought he could do a better job for these people in Africa if he had a medical degree. So he went back to school at the age of 30, and 12 years later got his medical degree. Following that, he took off for Africa with nothing whatsoever, sold everything he had, and took off to Africa. His decision cost him his job, cost him his position at the university. His friends, and including his mother, thought that he literally lost his mind. Who would give up something like that and take off to an unheard of country at the time called the Congo? So after his medical degree in 1913, he traveled to Africa. Now the poor man in our parable, Lazarus, as the stage opens, or the curtain opens on scene 2, is actually in heaven. And he's in heaven, and he's no longer in pain. He's no longer suffering. His role has been completely reversed between him and the rich man. Lazarus is in pretty good shape. And the rich man is the one that pleads, "This is terrible. What did I do to live like this, or to have this happen to me? Why am I being punished? If only I knew. If only God had sent a sign that I should care about people that I normally walked on, I would have taken care of them." And so he begs whoever is there and says, "Can you go back to Moses and Abraham, who were the gods at the time? And could you ask them that Lazarus go back, not me, but send Lazarus back, to take care of my brothers, to warn them, to teach them how to live their life so that this doesn't happen to them." So we got to give something to the poor guy. He's at least thinking of his brothers. He's at least thinking of them enough to send somebody else back to life to take care of him. So the message comes back to him that says, "Nope, sorry, we can't do that. It won't do any good." Moses has tried to teach him that it's not good to not look at people, to see right through them. It's not good to ignore the needy. Sending somebody back from the dead certainly isn't going to do the same. Now think about that. Somebody comes back from the dead to try to change the world. Won't work. In this parable, it won't work. Think about that. Have you heard that story before? Somebody comes back from the dead, is resurrected. But it won't work. We have a lot to learn. There's a story about, again, it's not a sin. It doesn't list all the things that this guy did that were bad, other than the fact that he looked through people. He didn't see the needy around him. It's not a sin to be rich or a sin to be blessed. Many of you have heard the story about the rich man. This exemplifies what I mean. The rich man that told his wife that when he dies, he wants her to grab a box and put all of his money that he's ever had and put it in the box and put that box into his coffin. And she agreed to do it. So the day of his funeral, the wife stands up, picks up this box, and quietly walks to the coffin, puts it inside there with him, and they close the coffin up and they take him out to be buried. One of the friends came up and said, "You really didn't do that, did you? Did you really give him all his money?" She said, "Yes, I did. I wrote him a check." Here's some more clues. Once he arrived in Africa, people came to see him on the very first day, suffering from diseases like smallpox, leprosy, malaria, skin diseases, dysentery, to name just a few. And during his first 9 months in Africa, he saw over 2,000 patients. He developed a personal philosophy called reverence for life. Reverence for life. The basic belief that life is good and she should be preserved, promoted, and raised to its highest value. In essence, he began to know and began to lead what missions are today. Besides healing the Africans, healing the native people there, he also taught them ways to stay healthy, to prevent diseases, to prevent infections, to defeat superstitions and defeat things like hate and belief in witch doctors. In 1953, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay? The parable today is extremely relevant to the story of our Name That Philanthropist. Because at the time, the rich man, we sometimes call it today the rich man syndrome. It's dramatically true today. If you walk into any bookstore and find countless books, many on the bestseller list, that talk about how to promote yourself, how to do what's right for you, putting me first, or meism. It's a meism. The NBC coverage of the 1988 Olympics asked the athletes who was the athlete that they most admired. Many people at the time that came up were folks like Carl Lewis, Florence Gifford Joyner, the long-distance runner who passed away several years later with a heart attack. And then one boxer that they interviewed, and I think I know who it is. The one boxer that they interviewed said, well, in all honesty, I think it's me. I admire me. I'm the most admired athlete in the world. In our parable today, the rich man had limited vision, limited faith, and limited love. Let's take a look at each one of these. Limited vision. He's not described, once again, as an evil person. There is no listing of the vices that he had or all the sins that he committed. He just looked through people. He didn't see them anymore. He was incapable of seeing people with his heart. He was only seeing people with his eyes and his mind. Blinded by his own lifestyle, he had forgotten how to see with his heart. He closed his eyes to the needs of others. Back to our philanthropist. This individual died in 1965 at the age of 90. He gave 60 years of service to others, 30 years after he had accomplished so much, and was even a professor of 4 or 5 different subjects. He was a symbol representing the kind of selfless attitude, and he inspired others to do the same. Do we know who he is yet? Valentino. Jesus, yeah. You're close, but he didn't live to be 90. Did I see a hand, Arlene?
Albert Schweitzer.
Arlene's got it. Albert Schweitzer. Very good, Arlene. Huh? Yeah, I'll cover it with you later. Yeah, I'll write you a check. Yeah. So after he had had done so much at the age of 30, he decided it wasn't enough, and he got his medical degree and started the missions in Africa. Albert Schweitzer. Quite a learned man that gave so much. But secondly, our rich man had limited faith. His faith was limited by his excesses. He had excuses for everything. If only God had come down and given me a sign, I would have believed. Excuses. I'm reminded of a story about our oldest son, Brian, who at the age of 6 was into everything. Everything was karate. It was chop, chop. He was going around the house just chopping everything. One morning I'm in the kitchen. He walks in there, and he's chopping away and hits the refrigerator, and then he hits the stove, and then he hits the dishwasher. And when he hits the dishwasher, he accidentally hits the on button. Now, no big deal, but it scared him. Whoa, what did I do? So he backed away a little bit. And then he came up to me and consoled me. He said, Dad, don't worry about a thing. We'll tell Mom you did it. What's relevant about our parable today and Name That Philanthropist? We mentioned that at the age of 30, he felt his life was incomplete, that he had read a magazine article about the depraved people in Africa, in the Congo more specifically, and that he felt he needed to do something, but he felt that the only way to really do something or to be the best at what he could do was to get a medical degree, and it took him 13 years to get the medical degree. By the way, his first hospital was an old chicken coop in Kenya, or in the Congo. At the age of 30, in 1904, one other thing happened. One other thing happened to Albert Schweitzer that caused him to think, I've got to get rid of everything. I need to be of help to those people in Africa. I need to start something called missions. I need to start it for the world. I need to sell everything I own, become a medical doctor, and go there and help. One other thing happened at that very same time. He read what Bonnie read to you this morning. That parable, Luke 16, changed him completely. Parables will change people. Parables will change you. Can you name a parable that has changed you recently? Amen.